Welcome to the deep dive. We know you're curious, you want to get smart on big topics, but without getting totally overwhelmed.
And today we're tackling a really major one.
Yeah, a huge one. The destruction of Jerusalem back in 70 AD.
It's often called a civilizational earthquake. It really did reshape religion, politics, society, and that whole part of the world.
Absolutely. And for this, we're drawing on, a whole range of sources. We've got the historical texts, of course, but also archaeology, things like coins, inscriptions.
Paleography, yeah. And even sociological analysis helps us understand the undercurrents.
Right, because the traditional story, it often leans heavily on one guy, Flavius Josephus.
Yeah. An essential source, but not the only one. Modern research adds so much more, sometimes even contradicting the standard narrative.
It's fascinating how these pieces fit together, isn't it? How archaeology can confirm something Josephus wrote, or maybe challenge it.
Exactly. It gives you a much richer picture.
Speaking of richer pictures, we've got a great resource to mention. This deep dive was really helped by the ebook Jerusalem Sieged, which comes courtesy of Next Republic.
Yes, it's a very thorough look at the event. Pulls together a lot of these different threads we'll be talking about.
And here's the great part for you listening. Next Republic Publisher is making Jerusalem Sieged available as a free download. It's the PC format.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Yeah, just check the description below this deep dive. You'll find a link right there. A really generous offer.
Definitely worth checking out if you want to go even deeper after this.
So our mission today is, to get beyond just the standard account. We want to look at the material evidence. Rebel coins, Roman weapons found on site, hidden tunnels.
And combine that with modern takes to really understand the causes, the layers, and crucially, the lasting impact of 70 AD.
We're aiming to unpack this whole historical earthquake. So, where do we start? The path to war seems logical.
Right. The first Jewish-Roman war, that's the backdrop. It kicked off in 66 AD and ran through to about 73, maybe 74 AD, a major rebellion against Rome.
But not out of the blue. Sources talk about rising tensions for a while, Roman mismanagement, corruption.
Titius Florus raiding the temple treasury, that was a huge provocation.
Huge. And just a general Roman insensitivity towards Jewish religious practices. That seems to be a recurring theme.
It really is. And you have to remember Jerusalem, and especially the Second Temple, wasn't just a city or a building. It was the absolute center.
The heart of everything. Religious, national, political.
Exactly. So any threat there felt existential. And initially, the rebels actually had some success. They even kicked the Roman garrison out of Jerusalem for a time.
Which probably fueled hopes, but also guaranteed a massive Roman response.
Inevitably. Vespasian and then his son Titus led that response, which eventually leads us to the siege itself. But the causes of the war, it's complicated.
Yeah, not just one thing. You mentioned Roman governance, ineptitude, corruption, sometimes outright brutality from the procurators.
Florus, as you said, but even earlier figures like Pilate had caused significant friction. Just a lack of basic respect for Jewish religious needs.
And then there's the economic side. Heavy Roman taxes plus temple tithes. It put a huge strain on people.
It led to debt, loss of land, and just the resentment of paying tribute to Rome, this foreign power. Add in famines, and it's a powder keg.
You also have the cultural and religious clashes, monotheism versus Roman polytheism, the spread of Greek culture.
Hellenism, yeah, and Roman actions that just seem deliberately provocative, like placing imperial standards near the temple area.
And that moment Josephus highlights, Eleazar ben Ananus stopping the sacrifices for the emperor. That felt like a real break.
A symbolic rupture, definitely. And underpinning all this was this strong current of Jewish nationalism, a desire for independence.
Messianic expectations, too, right? A belief that a leader would come to throw off the Roman yoke.
Absolutely. And you see that reflected so clearly in the material culture, like those rebel coins.
Ah, yes, the coins. Tell us about those.
They're fascinating. They minted their own silver and bronze coins, inscribed with things like Israel and freedom of Zion, sometimes redemption of Zion.
Wow, in Paleo-Hebrew script too, right? Harking back to an earlier independence.
Exactly. It's a powerful statement of sovereignty, rejecting Roman authority entirely.
So you've got external pressures from Rome, but also internal issues within Jewish society itself.
Oh, absolutely. It wasn't monolithic. There was a significant gap between the wealthy elite and the general population. Sociological studies point to this divide contributing to the tension.
And archaeology backs this up.
It really does. Excavations in the upper city, the wealthier part of Jerusalem, show elites adopting Greco-Roman lifestyles. Fancy imported pottery, frescoed walls, elaborate tombs.
It's kind of embracing the wider Roman world.
Whereas the majority practiced what some call domestic Judaism. You see lots of ritual baths or mikvah, simple local pottery, stone vessels which were considered ritually pure.
And simpler, undecorated tombs. So a real contrast in daily life and perhaps values.
A definite contrast. It highlights these internal divisions, potential resentments. You can see how friction might build.
And this wasn't just about wealth, right? There were different religious groups too.
Yes, you have the temple priesthood, the Pharisees focused on Torah study, more ascetic groups like the Essenes, different interpretations, different priorities.
And into this mix come the more radical factions.
Right. The Zealots, who believed only God should rule Judea and advocated, well, armed resistance. Figures like Eleazar ben Simon, John of Giscala.
And the Sicarii. They were even more extreme.
Known for using daggers, saké for assassinations, using terror tactics against Romans and even Jewish collaborators. Simon Bar Giora is often associated with this kind of approach later in the siege.
So their actions and Roman responses just kept escalating things.
A vicious cycle, exactly. Made any kind of peaceful resolution seem impossible.
Okay, so a really volatile situation. Let's pivot to the siege itself, 70 AD.
A brutal affair. Titus arrives with a massive Roman force, 4 legions plus auxiliaries.
And allies too, right? Including local Arab forces who had their own issues with the Judeans.
Yes, adding another layer to the conflict. And the timing, starting around Passover, was devastatingly effective.
Trapping potentially hundreds of thousands of pilgrims inside the city. Resources must have dwindled fast.
Immediately. And the main Roman assault focused on the north side, which was topographically the most vulnerable point.
And the Romans were masters of siege warfare. They built ramps, brought up siege engines.
Ballistas, catapults, powerful stuff. And then there's the circumvallation wall.
That incredible feat of engineering encircling the entire city. How long was it? About 8 kilometers?
Roughly, yes. Josephus says they built it in just 3 days, which sounds like an exaggeration.
Probably, but still incredibly fast.
It highlights their efficiency. The goal was total blockade. Cut off supplies, prevent escape, starve them out. This is what led to the horrific famine.
We don't have the remains of that specific wall in Jerusalem today, do we? Too much later building.
No, but we see incredibly well-preserved Roman siege works at places like Masada and Machaerus from around the same period. It gives you a very clear idea of what these operations looked like.
And they weren't just waiting. They were actively bombarding the city.
Oh, yes. Those ballistas hurled huge stones. Archaeology has turned up loads of these ballista balls, plus Roman arrowheads all over the city.
Tangible evidence of the assault.
Absolutely. And researchers like Kafir Arbiv have even used ballistic analysis to pinpoint likely Roman artillery positions, places like Cat Square, the Russian compound area.
Which makes sense, as that's near where remains of the third wall, the outermost defense, were found.
Exactly. Suggests that was a key target, but Jerusalem was heavily fortified.
3 main walls, plus strongholds like Herod's Palace Citadel Complex and the Antonia Fortress overlooking the temple.
The defenders put up fierce resistance. Josephus gives a timeline for the breaches. Third wall falls in late May.
Second wall soon after, early June.
Antonia Fortress, critically important, falls in late July. Then the temple courts in August, and the temple itself burns around the end of August.
And the upper city held out the longest. Until September.
September 8th, according to Josephus. And archaeology again lines up remarkably well.
We find remains of that third wall, the ballista stones nearby.
Finds along the main step street going up to the Temple Mount, those massive stones thrown down from the temple platform itself onto the street below.
You can still see those today. It's incredible.
It really is. Preserved Herodian gates, street levels buried under the rubble. It's like a snapshot of the destruction.
But inside the city, the human cost during the siege must have been unimaginable.
The famine. Josephus's descriptions are stomach-churning. People eating anything they could find, mass death, even cannibalism.
Does archaeology offer glimpses of this?
It's harder to see famine directly, but finds like pottery and lamps in underground cisterns and drainage channels. Maybe people hiding, searching for scraps of food or water.
Desperate measures.
Some studies suggest a decrease in artifacts in the later sediment layers of drainage channels, which could, perhaps, reflect the shrinking population due to starvation and disease.
And horrifyingly, while facing the Romans, the defenders were also fighting each other inside.
A tragic internal conflict.
Yeah.
John of Giscala versus Simon Margiora. Fighting for control, leading to terror, diverting resources.
Josephus claims they even burned granaries full of food that could have prolonged the resistance.
Yes. It's hard to prove that specific act archaeologically, but the extensive, thick layers of burning found all over the city are consistent with widespread destruction, potentially both internal and from the Roman assault.
Yet they kept resisting. Counterattacks, trying to burn Roman siege engines.
And digging tunnels. Extensive tunnel networks under the city were used for movement, for hiding.
And we found evidence of people hiding in these.
Yes, archaeological work in these underground systems, cisterns, passages, has found pottery, lamps, everyday items, even a Roman sword in one tunnel system. Broken paving stones above might even indicate Romans breaking through to hunt down those hiding below.
Chilling. It paints such a vivid picture of the final, desperate moments.
Which brings us to the climax. The fall of the temple and the utter devastation of the city.
After months of this, the walls are breached, the Antonia falls.
And then around the end of August 70 AD, the temple itself is destroyed, burned.
An event that echoes down through history. And this city, it wasn't just captured, it was razed.
The archaeological evidence is undeniable. Thick layers of ash, charcoal, collapsed stones, burned bricks, found everywhere.
Temple Mount area, the wealthy upper city like the famous burnt house.
Even the lower city, along the Pilgrim Street, evidence of fire is widespread, even outside the main built-up areas. It points to systematic destruction.
And thinking about those underground hiding places again, finding belongings there gives a very human dimension to the tragedy.
Silent witnesses to the last moments. And then there are the coins.
Right, the rebel coins we mentioned earlier, they tell their own story.
They start in year 1 of the revolt, 66 AD, and they stop abruptly in year 570 AD with the fall of Jerusalem.
First silver shekels, then bronze later on.
Yes, with those powerful Jewish symbols, the chalice, pomegranate staff, lulav, and etrog for Sukkot, amphora, vine leaf.
And the inscriptions in Paleo-Hebrew, shekel of Israel, Jerusalem the Holy.
And that telling shift from for the freedom of Zion in the early years to for the redemption of Zion later on.
Reflecting growing desperation.
It certainly seems that way, a plea for divine intervention as the situation became hopeless. They're asserting sovereignty, religious identity, economic freedom right to the end. And notably, no leader's name or image, unlike Roman coins.
These small objects pack such a punch. Now, we've relied heavily on Josephus. We need to talk about evaluating him as a source.
Absolutely crucial. He's indispensable, an eyewitness.
But he had switched sides. He was writing under the patronage of the Roman emperors Vespasian and Titus, the very people who destroyed Jerusalem.
Exactly. His pro-Roman, specifically pro-Flavian bias has to be acknowledged. So while his details are invaluable, we need a critical eye.
A prime example is the debate over Titus's intention for the temple.
Right. Josephus insists Titus wanted to save it, that the fire was accidental, started against orders.
But other sources disagree.
Yes, later writers like Sulpicius Severus, who seems to have drawn on the lost parts of Tacitus's histories, claim Titus and his commanders deliberately decided to destroy the temple to eradicate Judaism itself.
So, who do modern historians tend to believe?
The lean is often towards skepticism of Josephus here. Given his need to portray his patrons favorably and the strategic logic of destroying the rebellion's symbolic heart, the Tacitus Severus account seems plausible to many. Or perhaps Titus's initial intent, whatever it was, changed during the brutal fighting.
And archaeology? Can it settle the debate?
It confirms the massive destruction by fire, unequivocally. But it can't tell us about Titus's specific orders or intentions. The widespread nature of the destruction across the city might suggest a deliberate policy, but it's not definitive proof of intent regarding the temple specifically. Ambiguity remains.
So comparing Josephus with other fragments, and especially with the archaeology, is key.
Archaeology acts as a critical control. It confirms much of what Josephus describes, the scale of destruction, the hiding places, battle locations. But it also helps us question potential exaggerations and analyze his biased narrative more effectively.
Bringing all the evidence together. Okay, let's talk consequences, immediate and long-term.
The human cost, first and foremost, immense loss of life. Josephus's numbers are likely too high, but still, staggering mortality.
Tens of thousands killed, tens of thousands more enslaved, paraded in Rome, sent to mines, forced labor.
Archaeology gives hints of the violence remains at Yodfat, perhaps the burnt house. Survivors were displaced, fled to places like Masada, or joined the growing diaspora. And crucially, the center of Jewish life began shifting away from devastated Judea towards Galilee.
And the economic fallout. Total devastation.
Pretty much. Vespasian declared Judea imperial property. Land was confiscated, given to Roman soldiers, collaborators, like Josephus himself.
So former Jewish landowners lost everything, maybe forced to lease back their own land.
Exactly. Led to widespread impoverishment. The story of Nachman Ben-Gurion's daughter, reduced to poverty, is a traditional illustration of this.
Yeah.
The whole agrarian economy was shattered.
And then Rome imposed the fiscus judaicus, the Jewish tax.
This wasn't just replacing the temple tax. That money used to go to Jerusalem. Now, 2 denarii per person per year went straight to Rome, to the Temple of Jupiter Capitolinus.
And it applied to all Jews across the empire.
Men, women, children, elderly, slaves, unless they formally abandoned Judaism. It was collective punishment, a constant, empire-wide humiliation symbolizing Roman dominance.
Enforced very strictly under Domitian, apparently.
Yes, targeting even those suspected of Judaizing. Nerva later reformed the harshest aspects, but the tax itself continued for centuries. We even find tax receipts for it in places like Egypt.
Wow. So you mentioned the shift to Galilee. That became the new center.
Increasingly so. Judea was devastated, but Galilee had a larger surviving Jewish population and seems to have recovered more quickly. It provided the base for the next phase of Jewish life.
Which leads to another massive consequence, the birth of rabbinic Judaism.
With the temple gone, the sacrificial cult couldn't continue. Judaism had to redefine itself to survive.
And this is where figures like Rabbi Yohanan ben Zakkai come in, establishing a center at Yavne.
Precisely. The focus shifted radically, away from priests and sacrifices, towards rabbis, Torah study, prayer, good deeds, and the synagogue as the local center of religious life. This transformation allowed Judaism to persist and evolve without the temple.
An incredible adaptation. And finally, what about the relationship between Judaism and the early Christian movement?
The destruction definitely accelerated their separation. With Jerusalem gone and Judaism reorganizing itself, the Christian communities already spreading across the empire, some followers may have left Jerusalem before the siege, continued on their own distinct path. Nerva's tax reforms might have even formalized the distinction in Roman eyes.
So wrapping this up, the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 AD was far more than just a military event.
Absolutely. Complex causes rooted in politics, economics, religion, social tensions. A brutal siege brought to life by archaeology, and consequences that reshaped Judaism and the ancient world profoundly.
It really shows the value of combining sources, texts, archaeology, coins, sociology to get that fuller picture.
Definitely. And though ancient, this event speaks to enduring themes: resilience, the impact of conflict, how identities adapt and change under pressure.
Which leads to a final thought for you, our listener. Consider this. How can the destruction of something so central, so symbolic, like the temple, lead not only to immense loss, but also, paradoxically, to the creation of new, resilient forms of identity and practice?
What other historical moments carried that same complex legacy of destruction and reinvention? Something to mull over.
Definitely food for thought. And please, do explore the ebook Jerusalem Sieged for more depth. Remember, the free download link is in the description below, thanks to Next Republic Publisher.
It's been fascinating digging into this with you.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We hope it's given you a richer understanding of this pivotal moment.
We look forward to exploring another topic with you next time.
Until then, keep asking questions and keep diving deep.